it's a beacon to the rest of the world. And not just for our system of government, but for how it makes people feel inside. The founders didn't write the Constitution and the Bill of Rights with all this bravado and confidence. They wrote those documents in fear. They had come, or their families had, from places where people they knew were hung for speaking up for their rights.
Reading the Constitution, there were moments where I really felt the presence of, the fragility and beauty that was in that original dream of this country being founded in this way, and that incredible hope that went into those documents, and the incredible, I almost felt around me the protection that those documents give me and my children, the very person. And then I felt
we'll meet this threat with every method at our disposal.
A new report says the president and his advisors are still making anti-terrorism policy on the fly.
Police in Washington, D.C. have put in place an army of surveillance cameras.
There was a request from the White House as to the possibility of replacing all the United States attorneys.
Let me say that again to you. We don't torture.
Preventing mass terror will be the responsibilities of presidents far into the future.
I've always been a writer, and I write about politics and social issues.
Naomi Wolf is the author of several books, including the 90s feminist classic, The Beauty Myth.
I started having conversations around the country, talking with people at town meetings.
Convention is a very popular site.
The state is legalizing torture. This is becoming a police state. We carry out terrorist attacks.
And you know what really has to happen? This country's real debate has to go back to the citizens.
Traveling around America to warn people of this threat, I felt so strongly how each of us has a role to play in standing up for the Constitution. And I was really moved at how people from every walk of life wanted to stand up and fight.
Tonight I'm going to talk to you about some very disturbing warning signs that we have to pay attention to and rise up to confront. I wrote this book in a kind of desperate heat and haste last year because of an emergency I saw that we were facing. I have this friend. She and I often talk about news events together. And we would talk about the Bush administration and things that were happening, and she kept saying, they did this in Germany. They did this in Germany. And at first, really, I have to tell you, I thought that this was crazy talk, so extreme and so out there, right? And I really dismissed it. And she didn't drop it. She kept saying they did this in Germany. Finally, she sat me down and she put a stack of books in front of me and she pretty much said, read. And I started to read. And as I read, literally my hair stood on end because sound bites and images and phrases were leaping off the pages and were current in the discourse around us. Little echoes from things like Homeland, the Department of Homeland Security. It used to be called domestic security, right? Homeland, Heimat, is a word that became current in National Socialist discourse in about 1931-32. The National Socialists pioneered the practice of unloading the war dead off of trains in the darkness of night so people wouldn't know the extent of the war dead. The media couldn't take pictures. This administration has also unloaded the war dead from Iraq off the planes in the middle of the night, a departure from practice. Blackwater there was a paramilitary organization called Schwarzwasser. And I realized from my reading that intently, strategically, systematically, a small group of people set out to undermine the Constitution, opening the door for the horror to come. And so what became so clear to me from my reading is that Germany in those years wouldn't have looked so different from today. I mean, we, tend to think, oh, Nazi Germany, it's like a Leni Riefenstahl film. But in fact, Germany in 1930, 31, 32 had gay rights organizations and human rights organizations and feminist organizations. It had celebrities. It had all kinds of newspapers, all kinds of debate, all kinds of dissent. It was a modern state.
I didn't stop with Germany. I started to read about Stalin's Russia and Mussolini's Italy. East Germany in the 50s, Czechoslovakia in the 60s, Pinochet's coup in Chile in 73, and the Chinese crackdown on their democracy protesters at the end of the 80s. The same things recur again and again and again. Little subversions of people's rights, little constitutional changes.
And I saw that the great dictators learned from one another what was essentially a blueprint for closing down an open society. And then it became clear to me that this blueprint is simple. It consists of 10 steps. 10 clear steps. And then what became so chillingly clear to me is that these 10 steps are in place in the United States today.
Fear is the most devastating of all the threats we can have in a democracy. The language of fear will cause ordinary, decent people to do things that's not in their character.
The first thing is to invoke a terrifying internal and external threat. And sometimes it's a real threat.
After 9/11, the Bush administration used a terrible crime against our nation to launch what it called a, quote, war on terror, unquote. Other countries that were hit by the same bad guys went after the terrorists while still protecting the rights of their citizens. But the Bush team raised Americans' fear level as high as possible.
We will discover and destroy sleeper cells.
The government says because the 19 hijackers got into the country legally, investigators want to know if more terrorists have slipped in the same way.
Right after 9/11, the government created the Department of Homeland Security. And one of the first things it did was literally to create a way to manipulate the levels of our fear.
This is not uncommon. I wouldn't be so sure that the war on terror is real, but is also a hyped threat, right? Yellow, orange, red. Who does this? Who's really fighting terrorism? Does Israel do this? They really have terrorists. And they don't say, it's an orange day, Oops, it's red. They're out there quietly trying to find these guys and prevent these attacks, right? And they take pride in not frightening the citizens, in having daily life go on without fear. Let me remind you of how did the National Socialists come to power?
In Berlin in 1933, the German parliamentary building, the Reichstag, was set on fire. Many historians say this was a staged attack, but it was a terrible shock to people's sense of security. The National Socialists seized on this to pass laws to subvert the German Constitution.
So they said you're not patriotic unless you pass Clause 2 and later the Enabling Acts. It means the state can open your mail. It means the state can listen to your phone calls. It means that you as Parliament give up much of your authority to the leader. And so that legal process prepared the way for everything that
We see now in our own country legal maneuvers that undercut our civil liberties. By October 2001, the White House drove the USA Patriot Act through Congress. The Patriot Act is over 300 pages long. It weighed as much as a baby. It was printed at 3 in the morning, and they had to vote on it by 11 a.m. The Patriot Act gave the government access to wiretapping you, electronically surveilling you, researching your medical records, looking at your bank records, looking at your credit card statements, even looking at the books you checked out of the library, all without you ever having done anything wrong, and all without a warrant.
Today we take an essential step in defeating terrorism while protecting the constitutional rights of all Americans.
Congress passed a new law called the Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act of 2001. The Patriot Act. Sure is the axis of evil for bad acronyms.
The Patriot Act really opened the door for what followed. The administration used the cover of fighting terrorism to greatly expand intrusive federal law enforcement powers.
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
They scared us by invoking the greatest threats of all, the weapons of mass destruction and a false nuclear threat.
There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction.
Remember the drumbeat, war in Iraq, we've got to invade, we've got to invade. Remember the yellow cake, thank you, in Niger.
The British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
Iraq has sent agents to Niger, and they are buying yellow cake, which is used in nuclear bombs, so that, as Condoleezza Rice put it memorably, we cannot wait for the smoking gun to come in the form of a mushroom cloud. This scared me. Did it scare you? No? Well, you're smarter than I am. But this was completely fake. And up and down, we now know, up and down the State Department, we're like, fake, fake, don't do it, don't do it. But they hyped this threat.
This government does not torture people.
We don't torture people. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, we don't torture people. Waterboarding, we do not. I don't talk about techniques, and we don't torture people. Now listen to me. I want you to listen to me.
The second thing that always happens in a closing society is to create a secret prison system outside the rule of law where torture takes place. And by secret, I mean unaccountable. Now, the White House has said for years, America doesn't torture. We know now that America tortures grievously. But now we know categorically that the torture was directed from the top. Everything from directives to hang prisoners by their hands from the ceiling, electrodes on genitals, threats against family members, extremes of heat and cold, forced nakedness. These are tactics taken right from the Gulag. And we know there are black sites around the world where people are simply disappeared.
The secret prisons and Guantanamo became settings where U.S. agents tortured prisoners. The administration defended torture as being necessary to save American lives.
I wake up on November 14th, 2001, and I read in the Times that the president has issued what's called Military Order Number 1. And it is an order of the president's that he issues as the commander-in-chief, essentially says that the president can pick up any non-citizen anywhere in the world who the president thinks might be involved in terrorism. The hunt is on.
They're enemy combatants and terrorists who are being detained for acts of war against our country. And that is why different rules have to apply.
When people are unpopular, vilified, painted as devil, that's when rights get swept aside.
So the administration sought to redefine torture. John Yoo wrote a memo in 2002 that was a semantic scheme, a really evil semantic scheme that sought to redefine torture narrowly to just two criteria. One was organ failure, and the other was that severe pain and suffering must be inflicted with specific intent. And anything less than that did not, according to this memo, constitute torture.
Okay, look, you contributed to the writing of the 2002 memo. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
The memo was implemented at some point. Is that right?
What do you mean by implemented, sir?
What I mean by implemented is the guidance that was set forth in that legal memorandum was followed and put into action. Do you understand what I mean by implemented now, sir?
So you're asking me, was the memo followed?
I'm not going to get into semantical games with you in this 5 minutes. I need you to answer the question or refuse to.
The Army had for decades a manual on interrogation. It approved 16 methods of interrogation. Rumsfeld then directed to expand the 16 methods of interrogation to 35, and that started our downfall.
I don't see people kind of bringing the nation to a halt in protest against what's being done to these detainees. And even decent people say that they can't get that worked up about it. I mean, these people are represented as the worst of the worst. So quite apart from the morality of the torture of prisoners in our custody, quite apart from the fact that the Constitution forbids cruel and unusual punishment, quite apart from the fact that it's against the law, U.S. law as well as international law. So why should we care that brown people with Muslim names are being tortured? We should care for our own sakes because of the record of history. When you look at Germany, you see this clear pattern. In 1930, 31, 32, torture was still illegal in Germany, but the SA, these informal paramilitary groups, would drag people out of halls like this one if they asked a confrontational question and take them to these makeshift torture cellars.
And one of the early parts of the Hitler regime was really to pick up people and put them into essentially concentration camps. And instead of calling that torture, which is what was going on, they called what they did to people enhanced interrogation techniques.
Jefferson and Franklin categorically believed that it wasn't just Americans' right to criticize the government, it was Americans' duty. The Declaration of Independence actually says you have a duty to rise up and overthrow tyranny and injustice. That is your responsibility as an American. And Benjamin Franklin, knew it was up to us. I mean, there's this great story that he was coming out of the Constitutional Convention, and a woman asked him, "So, what is it? Is it a republic or is it not a republic?" And he said, "A republic, man, if you can keep it."